Have you ever heard of a serial killer who didn't just murder his victims, but hunted them like animals in the wilderness? This is the chilling story of Robert Hansen, a man who terrorized Anchorage, Alaska, for over a decade, abducting, assaulting, and killing women in the most horrific way imaginable. His crimes were not just about murder. Hansen flew his victims deep into the Alaskan wilderness, set them loose, and hunted them down with a rifle. Stick around as we uncover the disturbing case of the Butcher Baker, one of the most sadistic killers in American history. Robert Hansen's life seemed unremarkable at first glance, but beneath the surface, his childhood was filled with rejection, humiliation, and growing resentment toward women. Born in 1939 in Esterville, Iowa, he was the son of Christian Hansen, a strict Danish immigrant who forced young Robert to work long hours at the family's bakery. Unlike other kids, Hansen didn't have an easy upbringing. He was painfully shy, suffered from a debilitating stutter, and was covered in severe acne that left his face permanently scarred. His classmates mocked him relentlessly, calling him names and isolating him from social circles. Hansen desperately wanted the attention of girls, but he was constantly rejected, ignored, or ridiculed. His resentment toward women began in his teenage years, when he saw handsome, popular boys easily attracting girls, while he remained an outcast. He would later admit that these years planted the seed for his violent fantasies of getting revenge on the women who had humiliated him. He withdrew further from social interactions and instead focused his energy on hunting, an activity that made him feel powerful, dominant, and in control. By his teenage years, Hansen had developed violent sexual fantasies, but instead of acting on them directly, he took up hunting. He became obsessed with stalking and killing animals, finding a sick sense of control and power in tracking prey. Unlike his peers, who hunted for sport or food, Hansen found something far more disturbing in the act: pleasure in watching something struggle before it died. His urge for control soon escalated into petty crimes and acts of destruction. At 21 years old, Hansen committed his first known violent crime. He set fire to a school bus garage in Iowa, an act that had no clear motive beyond a desire for destruction and power. This was the first real indication that his fantasies were becoming reality. For this crime, he was sentenced to 3 years in prison, but his quiet, mild-mannered personality convinced the parole board to release him after just 20 months. This would become a pattern. Hansen was good at hiding his true nature, portraying himself as a harmless, awkward baker, while beneath the surface, he was developing into a predator. After his release, Hansen moved to Alaska in 1967, looking for a fresh start. To the public, he was a hardworking family man, married with children, running a successful bakery in Anchorage. He built a reputation as an expert hunter, even setting world records for hunting wild game. But his love for hunting had begun to take a darker turn. He was no longer satisfied with just killing animals. If this case is as disturbing to you as it sounds, take a second to like this video. it really helps the channel out. Hansen's targets were often young women working as dancers or sex workers in Anchorage. He had a chilling method. He would lure victims into his car under false pretenses, pull a gun on them, and force them to his remote cabin. There, he would assault and torture them, but that was only the beginning. Once he was done, he would fly them deep into the Alaskan wilderness in his private bush plane, set them loose, and give them a head start before hunting them down like animals. Armed with a high-powered hunting rifle, Hansen would stalk his terrified victims through the dense forests, prolonging their suffering as he toyed with them before delivering the fatal shot. Unlike other serial killers who acted impulsively, Hansen was methodical and careful. He selected victims who were less likely to be reported missing, making it difficult for police to track his movements. His hunting ground was the remote wilderness outside Anchorage, where he had vast stretches of uninhabited land, thick forests, and freezing conditions that made survival impossible for his victims. Many of his victims were never found, their remains lost to the elements, devoured by wildlife, or buried in the vast Alaskan terrain. For over a decade, Hansen eluded authorities, largely because he didn't fit the typical profile of a serial killer. He was married, had a steady job, and maintained a quiet, respectable image in Anchorage. Since many of his victims were runaways or sex workers at the time, law enforcement often overlooked such cases. However, in 1983, a survivor named Cindy Paulson changed everything. Cindy, a 17-year-old who had been abducted by Hansen, managed to escape from his car and ran to the police. She provided a detailed description of his house, his weapons, and his brutal methods. But even with Cindy's testimony, police initially hesitated to arrest Hansen, as he had built a strong reputation in the community. Investigators finally began to connect Hansen to a growing list of missing women. A search of his home revealed a chilling map with X marks on remote locations in the Alaskan wilderness, places where bodies would later be discovered. Alongside this, police found a stash of jewelry belonging to his victims, trophies from his kills. Faced with overwhelming evidence, Hansen confessed to murdering at least 17 women, though authorities believe the actual number could be much higher. He pleaded guilty and was sentenced to 461 years in prison. Robert Hansen died in 2014 after spending 30 years behind bars. Despite his death, the horror of his crimes still lingers, serving as a chilling reminder of the monsters who can lurk behind ordinary appearances. His twisted combination of hunting skills, social resentment, and methodical planning made him one of the most dangerous killers in history. Many have compared Hansen's methods to a real-life horror movie, his crimes more disturbing than any fictional slasher film. The idea of a killer hunting his victims like wild game in the freezing, desolate Alaskan wilderness is something out of nightmares. What do you think? Was Robert Hansen truly a product of his upbringing? Or was he always destined to become a monster? Let us know in the comments. And if you found this deep dive compelling, subscribe for more in-depth true crime stories.